Emperor Vexithul sat on his crystal throne, his 6 arms resting on the carved armrests that had been shaped from the bones of the last species to challenge his rule. The throne room stretched for nearly a mile in every direction, its walls covered in the flags of 12,000 conquered worlds. Each flag told a story of surrender, defeat, and submission to the mighty Zeltharian Galactic Empire. The Emperor's skin shifted from deep purple to angry red as he read the report his scouts had brought him. His chief military advisor, General Mortax, stood at attention nearby, waiting for his master's reaction. The massive alien's 4 eyes watched nervously as the Emperor's tentacles writhed with growing irritation. "Tell me again about this new species," Vexthul growled, his voice echoing through the vast chamber like rolling thunder. General Mortax cleared his throat, a sound like grinding metal. "They call themselves humans, Your Magnificence. They come from a small yellow star system they call Sol. Our deep scouts found them about 6 months ago during routine expansion surveys." The Emperor leaned forward, his massive frame creaking against the throne. "And what makes them think they can ignore our standard first contact protocols? Every species in this galaxy knows to send tribute and surrender documents the moment they detect our ships." "That's just it, Your Magnificence," the general said, shuffling through his data tablets. "They seem to have completely ignored our presence. Our scouts reported that human vessels detected them almost immediately, but instead of fleeing or sending surrender signals, they just watched. Some even seemed to follow our ships for a while, like they were curious." This made the Emperor's skin flush an even deeper shade of red. In his 1,000 years of rule, no species had ever shown mere curiosity when faced with imperial might. They showed fear, terror, sometimes desperate courage, but never casual interest. "What is their military capability?" Vexthul demanded. General Mortax consulted his reports again. "Our analysis shows primitive technology, Your Magnificence. They appear to be using basic chemical propulsion for space travel. We detected some nuclear technology, but nothing more advanced than simple fission reactions. Their largest vessels seem to be cargo ships or civilian transports. We found no evidence of plasma weapons, quantum shields, or gravitational manipulation technology." The Emperor laughed, a sound like breaking glass that made several courtiers step back in fear. "So they are barely above the Stone Age level, yet they dare to ignore imperial authority? How amusing." "There is one strange thing, Your Magnificence," the general continued carefully. "Our scouts reported that their deep space sensor arrays are unusually sophisticated for such a primitive species. They seem to track our ships across several light years with perfect accuracy." Vexthul waved a dismissive tentacle. "Probably some simple radio technology they stumbled upon by accident. Many primitive species develop basic sensors before they learn proper space travel. It means nothing." The Emperor stood up from his throne, his massive form casting shadows across the assembled court. At nearly 12 feet tall, he towered over even his largest generals. His ceremonial armor, forged from the metals of 100 conquered worlds, gleamed in the artificial light. "Send the 47th Conquest Armada," he commanded. 300 ships should be more than enough to handle a primitive species. "Who is commanding that fleet?" "Admiral Kreenash, Your Magnificence," General Mortax replied. "He has been requesting a more challenging assignment for some time." The Emperor's laugh echoed again. "Then this will disappoint him greatly. Make sure he understands this is a simple demonstration mission. Standard subjugation protocol. Give them the usual choice, surrender and slavery, or death and destruction." As the general bowed and left to carry out his orders, Emperor Vexthul returned to his throne. He thought about the humans and their strange behavior. In his long reign, he had conquered species with technology far more advanced than these primitive creatures possessed. He had crushed civilizations that controlled hundreds of star systems. The idea that a species barely capable of leaving their home system might pose any challenge was laughable. Meanwhile, in a small observation post orbiting Pluto, Dr. Sarah Chen finished reviewing the same Imperial scout reports that had puzzled General Mortax. Unlike the Empire's analysts, she was smiling as she read through the data. "They really have no idea, do they?" she said to her colleague, Dr. James Torres, who was monitoring communications from the approaching Imperial fleet. "None at all," James replied, pulling up a holographic display of the advancing ships. "Their scanning technology is about what we expected from the preliminary reports. They're seeing exactly what we want them to see." Sarah leaned back in her chair and took a sip of coffee. 300 ships. That's actually more than I thought they would send for a first contact scenario. "Admiral Wei thinks it's just the right amount," James said. "Enough to make it interesting for the news feeds, but not so many that it becomes complicated." Sarah nodded and pulled up her own display, showing the disposition of human ships throughout the solar system. To anyone watching with Imperial-level sensors, it would look like a small defensive fleet of about 50 vessels, mostly arranged near Jupiter. What those sensors couldn't detect was the true nature of those ships, or the thousands of others stationed throughout the system. "How long until they arrive in the outer system?" she asked. "About 6 hours," James replied. "The Admiral wants to meet them near Jupiter's orbit. Nice open space, good visibility for the cameras." Sarah smiled and started typing up her daily report. Another day, another first contact scenario. She wondered if the Empire would be more or less surprised than the Confederation had been last year, or the Republic before that. Probably about the same, she figured. They all made the same basic assumptions about human technology and capabilities. As she worked, she could hear her colleagues in the next room discussing dinner plans and weekend activities. The approaching Imperial fleet barely registered as more than a minor scheduling inconvenience. After all, this was just another routine security operation. Admiral Kreenash stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, watching the primitive solar system grow larger on his main display screen. His ship alone was nearly 20 miles long, bristling with enough firepower to crack open small moons. Behind him, 300 more vessels of the Imperial fleet moved in perfect formation, their black hulls gleaming with threat displays that had terrified countless species across the galaxy. The Admiral's 4 eyes studied the tactical display with growing confusion. According to his sensors, there were only about 50 human vessels waiting for them near the large gas giant the humans called Jupiter. The ships were small, roughly the size of Imperial frigates, and showed no obvious weapon systems or defensive shields. "This is insulting," muttered Commander Zektar, the Admiral's second in command. "They send us to cow a primitive species, and they can't even muster a proper fleet to be destroyed. Where is the challenge in this?" Admiral Kreenash's tentacles twitched with annoyance. He had been hoping for a proper military campaign, something that might earn him recognition and possibly promotion to the inner circle of admirals. Instead, he was about to obliterate a handful of civilian vessels that probably contained refugees trying to flee their home world. "Signal the fleet to assume attack formation," he ordered. "Let's at least make this look impressive for the recordings. The Emperor will want to see proper Imperial might displayed, even against such pathetic opposition." The massive ships began to spread out in the classic Imperial battle formation, a sight that had spelled doom for thousands of civilizations. Each vessel powered up its primary weapons systems. Plasma cannons that could melt continents began to glow with deadly energy. Quantum missiles capable of destroying entire cities armed themselves in their launch tubes. Shield generators that could deflect the energy output of stars hummed to life. As the fleet moved into position, Admiral Kreenash opened a communication channel to the human ships. This was standard procedure for all Imperial conquests. Give the enemy one chance to surrender, then destroy them utterly. It was both psychological warfare and practical efficiency. "Attention, primitive vessels," the Admiral began, his voice carrying the weight of Imperial authority across the void. "I am Admiral Kreenash of the Zeltharian Galactic Empire, commander of the 47th Conquest Armada. By Imperial decree, your species is now subject to the rule of Emperor Vexthul, master of 10,000 worlds, crusher of rebellions, and supreme authority of this galaxy." He paused for dramatic effect, as he had done hundreds of times before. The speech was almost ritual by now, refined over centuries of conquest to achieve maximum psychological impact. "You have exactly 1 solar minute to power down your vessels and prepare for Imperial occupation forces," he continued. "Surrender now, and your species will be granted the honor of serving the Empire as workers and servants. Resist, and you will be destroyed so completely that no trace of your existence will remain in this universe. Choose wisely." The Admiral cut the channel and settled back to wait. Most species responded immediately with desperate pleas for mercy or frantic attempts to negotiate better surrender terms. A few tried to flee, which provided excellent target practice for his gunners. Very rarely some species chose to fight, which at least offered a few minutes of entertainment before their inevitable destruction. What Admiral Kreenash did not expect was silence. For several minutes, the human ships simply sat there, maintaining their loose formation near the gas giant. They showed no signs of powering down their systems, but they also made no aggressive moves. They just waited. "Sir," reported his communications officer, "we're receiving no response from the human vessels. Should I repeat the surrender demand?" Before the Admiral could answer, a new voice came across the communications channel. It spoke in perfect galactic standard, the formal language of Imperial diplomacy that most primitive species shouldn't have known existed. "Admiral Kreenash, this is Admiral Chen Wei of the Terran Defense Force. Thank you for the introduction. We've received your surrender demand and appreciate you taking the time to spell out the terms so clearly." Admiral Kreenash's skin flushed purple with surprise. The human spoke as if they were discussing a business proposal, not a life-or-death ultimatum from the greatest military power in the galaxy. "However," the human voice continued in the same calm, polite tone, "I'm afraid we'll have to decline your offer. Earth isn't interested in joining the Empire at this time. We're quite happy with our current system of government." Commander Zektar's mandibles clicked together in shock. "Did he just refuse Imperial authority?" he whispered. Admiral Chen's voice came through the speakers again, still maddeningly calm. "Now, Admiral, I understand you probably have orders to carry out, so I don't expect you to just turn around and leave because we said no. Would you prefer to withdraw your fleet now and report back to your superiors that humanity declined their generous offer, or shall we provide a demonstration of why acceptance wouldn't be in anyone's best interests?" Admiral Kreenash felt his control slipping. No species had ever spoken to an Imperial commander with such casual dismissal. The tone suggested that the human actually believed his tiny fleet could somehow threaten 300 Imperial warships. "You dare mock the might of the Empire?" the Admiral roared. "I have enough firepower here to burn your entire world to ash and scatter the remains across space. You command 50 primitive vessels against 300 ships of the line." "Actually, it's 53 vessels," Admiral Chen replied with what sounded suspiciously like amusement. "But who's counting? Look, Admiral, I really would prefer to resolve this peacefully. Your ships look expensive, and I'm sure the Empire put a lot of time and effort into building them. It would be a shame to see all that work go to waste." The casual confidence in the human's voice finally pushed Admiral Kreenash over the edge. "All ships, prepare for immediate attack," he commanded. "Target the human vessels with maximum firepower. Show these primitives the price of defying Imperial will." Across his fleet, 300 warships began charging their primary weapons. The space around Jupiter lit up with the ominous glow of enough destructive power to sterilize entire star systems. Admiral Chen's voice came through one last time before the attack began. "Well, if you insist, don't say we didn't warn you." Admiral Kree Nash watched his tactical display with growing satisfaction as 300 Imperial warships prepared to unleash destruction upon the tiny human fleet. Each ship's weapons officer confirmed ready status. Plasma cannons glowed white-hot with barely contained energy. Quantum missile tubes stood loaded with enough firepower to crack moons. "All ships report weapons charged and ready, Admiral," Commander Zektar announced with obvious pleasure. "Shall we show these primitives what happens when they defy Imperial authority?" "Fire at will," Admiral Kree Nash commanded. "All weapons, all ships. Leave nothing but space dust." The first salvo from the Imperial fleet should have been spectacular. 300 ships firing simultaneously had always created a light show visible from several star systems away. The combined energy output was equivalent to several suns going nova at the same time. Instead, something went wrong. The plasma cannons of the lead dreadnought crushing fist flickered and died just as they were about to fire. The ship's weapons officer frantically checked his instruments, his 3 eyes wide with confusion. "Sir, primary weapons are experiencing power fluctuations," he reported. "The plasma is destabilizing in the firing chambers." Before Admiral Kree Nash could respond, similar reports started coming in from across the fleet. Ship after ship reported weapons malfunctions, power grid failures, and system anomalies. The devastating barrage that should have erased the human fleet from existence never materialized. "Engineering, what is happening to our weapons?" the Admiral demanded. "Unknown, sir," came the reply from the ship's chief engineer. "All systems were functioning normally 30 seconds ago. Now we're seeing cascade failures throughout the primary power distribution network. It's as if something is causing our own energy systems to work against themselves." On the human side of the battlefield, Admiral Chen Wei sat in his command chair aboard the Terra Nova, sipping a cup of coffee and watching the Imperial fleet's increasingly frantic attempts to fire their weapons. His ship looked like a simple civilian vessel from the outside, but appearances could be deceiving when it came to human technology. "Status report," he asked his tactical officer, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Martinez. "Defensive protocols are working perfectly, sir," she replied. "We've successfully redirected power flows on 87 Imperial vessels, introduced harmless but disruptive feedback loops in their weapon systems, and isolated their shield generators from their main power grid. No Imperial ship is currently capable of offensive operations." Admiral Chen nodded approvingly. "Excellent work. Any casualties on their side?" "None, sir. All interventions are non-lethal. Their life support systems are functioning normally, and we've been careful not to damage anything that can't be easily repaired." Meanwhile, aboard the Eternal Dominion, Admiral Kree Nash was discovering that his problems extended far beyond just weapons failures. His ship's shields flickered and died. Navigation systems began displaying random coordinates. Even the artificial gravity started fluctuating, causing several bridge officers to float helplessly near the ceiling. "Sir," his communications officer reported with a trembling voice, "I'm receiving a transmission from the human fleet." "Put it through," Admiral Kree Nash growled, though he was beginning to suspect this conversation would not go the way he had planned. Admiral Chen's calm voice filled the bridge once again. "Admiral, you seem to be having some technical difficulties. I hope no one over there is hurt. Artificial gravity failures can be dangerous if you're not prepared for them." "What have you done to our ships?" the Imperial Admiral demanded. "Oh, nothing permanent," Admiral Chen replied cheerfully. "We've just introduced some minor inefficiencies into your power systems. Think of it as electronic warfare, but much more polite. Your ships are perfectly safe, just temporarily. Well, harmless." Commander Zektar floated past the main view screen, his arms windmilling frantically as he tried to reach something to hold on to. "Sir, All ships are reporting similar problems. It's not just us. Admiral Chen continued, speaking as if he were giving a friendly lecture. You see, Admiral, your weapons systems rely on very sophisticated energy management protocols. Plasma cannons, for instance, require precise electromagnetic field control to maintain stable firing chambers. If you introduce small timing delays into the field generators, the plasma becomes unstable and has to be safely vented rather than fired. Admiral Kreenash felt a cold chill run through his body. This human was describing Imperial weapons technology with the casual familiarity of an engineer who had built the systems himself. Similarly, Admiral Chen went on, quantum shields depend on carefully synchronized gravitational field manipulation. Add tiny fluctuations to the synchronization signals, and the shields have to shut down automatically to prevent spatial distortions. It's all very safe, really. Your ship's safety systems are actually working exactly as designed. How do you know so much about Imperial technology? Admiral Kreenash asked, though he was beginning to fear the answer. Well, it's not exactly secret information, Admiral Chen replied. Your ships broadcast quite a lot of technical data on standard Imperial frequencies, maintenance schedules, diagnostic information, even some design specifications. We've been monitoring Imperial communications for quite some time now. The truth hit Admiral Kreenash like a physical blow. The humans hadn't just detected Imperial scout ships. They had been watching Imperial fleet movements, analyzing Imperial technology, and preparing for this encounter for months or even years. Besides, Admiral Chen added, and the Admiral could swear he heard amusement in the human's voice. Your technology is really quite impressive for its age. Very robust, very reliable. It reminds us of some of the designs we were using about 50 years ago. On worlds throughout the galaxy, news networks were broadcasting live footage of the encounter. The images showed the mighty Imperial fleet floating helplessly in space, while the tiny human ships maintained perfect formation, their systems apparently unaffected by whatever force had crippled 300 warships. In living rooms and public squares across 1,000 star systems, species that had lived in terror of Imperial might for generations watched in amazement as the supposedly invincible fleet was casually neutralized by a handful of vessels from an unknown species. Children pointed at their screens and asked their parents how the small ships had defeated the big ones. The parents had no answers. Back in the Jupiter system, Admiral Chen finished his coffee and set down his cup. Now then, Admiral Kreenash, shall we discuss the situation like civilized beings? I really would prefer not to escalate this any further. Admiral Kreenash floated near his command chair, gripping the armrest with all 6 of his hands as his ship's artificial gravity continued to fluctuate wildly. Around him, his bridge crew struggled to maintain their positions, while their instruments displayed a cascade of system failures that seemed to multiply by the minute. "Engineering report!" he barked into his communicator. The voice that came back was filled with panic. "Admiral, we can't find the source of the problems. It's as if our own systems are sabotaging themselves. Every time we try to fix one issue, 3 more appear. The power grid is running, but somehow the energy isn't reaching where it needs to go." "What about sensors? Can we at least see what the humans are doing to us?" "That's the strangest part." "Sir," his sensor officer replied, her voice cracking with stress. "I'm not detecting any energy weapons, no particle beams, no electromagnetic pulses. According to our instruments, the human ships are barely active. They're using less power than a civilian transport." Admiral Kreenash felt his stomach twist with a terrible realization. If the humans were doing this with minimal power usage, what were their ships actually capable of when they tried? Across the fleet, other Imperial commanders were reaching the same horrifying conclusion. Captain Velmoth of the Iron Thunder was the first to voice what everyone was beginning to think. "Admiral," he said over the fleet communication channel, "request permission to ask the humans how they're doing this. Our engineers are completely baffled." This level of precision system interference shouldn't be possible without massive power expenditure or direct physical access to our ships. Before Admiral Kreenash could respond, Admiral Chen's voice came through on an open channel that somehow reached every ship in the Imperial fleet simultaneously. "Oh, you want to know about our methods? I suppose there's no harm in explaining, since you're probably going to figure it out eventually anyway." The human's tone was that of a teacher addressing curious students. "We're not actually attacking your ships, Admiral. We're just adjusting them." A holographic display appeared on every Imperial bridge, apparently projected by the human ships. It showed a detailed schematic of Imperial power distribution systems with thousands of tiny red dots highlighting specific components. "Your ships use a very centralized power management system," Admiral Chen continued. "Everything runs through these primary distribution nodes here, here, and here. Very efficient design, really. The problem is, if you know the exact frequencies your power conduits operate on, you can send very subtle electromagnetic pulses that cause microscopic timing delays in the switching circuits." The hologram zoomed in on one of the red dots, showing how a delay measured in nanoseconds could cause power to arrive at weapons systems just slightly out of phase, making them shut down automatically rather than risk damage. "It's really quite elegant," Admiral Chen said with obvious appreciation. "Your engineers designed excellent safety systems. We're just encouraging those safety systems to activate." Admiral Kreenash stared at the display in growing horror. You're hacking our ships? With external transmissions?" "Hacking is such an ugly word," Admiral Chen replied. "We prefer to think of it as technical assistance. Although I have to admit, your computer security protocols are quite primitive. Most of your systems are still using the same basic encryption algorithms we cracked about 15 years ago." Commander Zektar, who had finally managed to strap himself into an emergency chair, looked at his admiral with wide eyes. "Sir, if they can do this to our entire fleet, what are they doing to ships throughout the Empire?" It was a question Admiral Kreenash didn't want to think about, but Admiral Chen apparently heard it anyway. "Oh, we're not interfering with any ships outside this system," the human said reassuringly. "That would be terribly rude. This is purely a local demonstration. We believe in proportional response." The casual way the human dismissed the idea of crippling Imperial ships across the galaxy was somehow more terrifying than if he had threatened to do exactly that. It suggested that reaching Imperial vessels anywhere in known space would be trivial for humanity if they chose to do so. "Besides," Admiral Chen continued, "this isn't even a military operation for us. This is more like community policing. The ships you're facing are part of our system defense patrol, not our actual navy." Admiral Kreenash felt his skin turn pale blue, a color that indicated deep shock among his species. "System Defense Patrol? Think of us as the local neighborhood watch," Admiral Chen explained. "We handle minor security issues, first contact situations, that sort of thing. Our job is mainly to make sure visitors don't cause problems for the local residents." "Then where is your real navy?" Admiral Kreenash asked, though part of him desperately didn't want to know. "Oh, they're around. Some are probably watching from a distance to make sure we don't need backup. But this really doesn't require military intervention. You're not actually threatening Earth or any human colonies. You're just, well, you're being a bit rude, really." Throughout the Imperial fleet, ship commanders listened to this conversation with mounting dread. They had brought 300 warships, the pride of the Imperial Navy, to conquer what they thought was a primitive species. Instead, they had been effortlessly disabled by what amounted to a police force. On Earth, families continued watching the news coverage of the encounter while eating dinner. The live feeds showed the massive Imperial ships drifting helplessly while the small human vessels maintained perfect formation. Children asked their parents why the alien ships were just floating there like that. Parents explained that the visitors had been asked to leave and were thinking about it. In the imperial capital, Emperor Vex Thul watched the same feeds with growing rage and terror. His advisors huddled in corners, afraid to speak, as they realized that everything they thought they knew about galactic military balance was wrong. "Get me a direct communication link to Admiral Kreenash," the Emperor commanded. "I want to know exactly what we're dealing with." But deep down, Emperor Vexthul was beginning to suspect that he already knew. The Zeltharian Empire, which had conquered 12,000 star systems and crushed every military force it had ever encountered, had just discovered that they were not the apex predators of the galaxy. They weren't even close. Back in the Jupiter system, Admiral Chen checked his watch and opened another communication channel. "Admiral Kreenash, I hate to rush you, but we've been out here for almost 2 hours now, and some of my crew are getting hungry. Would you like us to help restore your ship's system so you can return to Imperial space, or would you prefer to continue this conversation?" "Either way is fine with us." Admiral Kreenash stared at the holographic display showing his fleet's status, every ship marked with warning indicators and system failures. 300 of the most powerful warships in the galaxy floated helplessly in space, defeated not by superior firepower, but by what the humans casually described as technical assistance. The communication channel crackled to life with a new voice. Emperor Vexthul himself was speaking, his words transmitted across the vast distance from the imperial capital directly to Admiral Kreenash's flagship. "Admiral," the Emperor's voice carried a tone that Kreenash had never heard before, uncertainty mixed with barely controlled fear. "Report your status immediately." Admiral Kreenash glanced around his bridge, where his crew members were still floating in random directions due to the malfunctioning gravity systems. "Your Magnificence, the human ships have neutralized our offensive capabilities. No damage to Imperial vessels, no casualties reported, but we are completely unable to carry out the conquest mission." A long silence stretched across space before the Emperor responded. "How many human ships are you facing?" 53 vessels, Your Magnificence. Small ships, roughly frigate class by our standards." Another pause. "Admiral Kreenash, you will withdraw immediately. Return to Imperial space and report directly to me for debriefing." Before the Admiral could acknowledge the order, Admiral Chen's voice came through on the same channel. The human had apparently been listening to the entire conversation. "Your Magnificence," Admiral Chen said, using the Imperial title with perfect pronunciation, "this is Admiral Chen Wei of the Terran System Defense Patrol. I hope you'll forgive the intrusion, but your Admiral's communication equipment was accidentally included in our monitoring sweep." Emperor Vexthul's reply came through gritted teeth. "What do you want, human?" "Nothing at all, actually," Admiral Chen responded cheerfully. "We're quite satisfied with the current situation. However, I wanted to make sure there were no misunderstandings about today's events. Admiral Kreenash and his fleet are perfectly welcome to return home safely. We've prepared a simple software patch that will restore all their ship's systems to normal operation once they're outside our solar system." "And if we return with a larger fleet?" the Emperor asked, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. "Well, that would be your choice to make," Admiral Chen replied. "Though I should mention that our actual military commanders would probably find a larger Imperial fleet much more interesting than we did. They get bored easily, and they have access to considerably more creative, defensive options than we do." The implication hung in space like a physical presence. If a neighborhood watch patrol could disable 300 Imperial warships without effort, what could humanity's actual military do? "However," Admiral Chen continued, "we'd much prefer to skip the unpleasantness entirely. Earth would be very interested in establishing formal diplomatic relations with the Empire, trade agreements, cultural exchange programs, that sort of thing. Much more profitable for everyone than this sort of misunderstanding." Admiral Kreenash watched his status displays as human technicians began remotely repairing his ship's systems. Weapons came back online, shields reactivated, and artificial gravity returned to normal. It was simultaneously the most helpful and most terrifying thing he had ever experienced. "Your ships are ready for travel, Admiral," Admiral Chen announced. "Safe journey back to Imperial space. When you're ready to send a proper diplomatic mission, please feel free to contact us through normal channels. We'll be happy to host formal negotiations." As the Imperial fleet prepared to limp away from the solar system, Admiral Kreenash realized that this moment marked the end of an era. The Zeltharian Empire had built its power on the assumption that they possessed the most advanced technology and the strongest military force in the galaxy. That assumption had just been shattered by a species they had dismissed as primitives. The journey back to Imperial space took 3 days. During that time, reports began flooding in from across the galaxy. News networks on 1,000 worlds were broadcasting footage of the encounter. Species that had submitted to Imperial rule because they saw no alternative were suddenly asking new questions about their situation. On the remote world of Kethvar, the local Imperial governor found himself facing mass demonstrations for the first time in 50 years. The protesters carried signs with images of the small human ships and the helpless Imperial fleet. On the manufacturing world of Zrex Prime, workers began demanding better conditions and representation in Imperial government. They had seen what happened when someone said no to Imperial authority, and the results were encouraging. Within a week of the Jupiter encounter, 12 Imperial colonies had declared independence. Within a month, entire sectors were in open revolt. But the most shocking reports came from Imperial intelligence. Their deep space monitoring stations had detected something that sent chills through the highest levels of government. Humanity had colonies, lots of them. The primitive species that had casually disabled an Imperial fleet had actually been quietly spreading across dozens of star systems for decades. Human ships had been observed in regions the Empire had never even explored. The species that Imperial scouts had described as barely capable of leaving their home system had apparently been traveling between stars before the Empire even knew they existed. Emperor Vexthul sat in his throne room, reading report after report that painted a picture he didn't want to accept. Humanity wasn't a primitive species that had somehow stumbled upon advanced technology. They were an established interstellar civilization that had been watching the Empire for years, analyzing their weaknesses and preparing for the day when contact became inevitable. The Emperor's military advisors had calculated that humanity probably controlled at least 50 star systems, possibly more. Their technology was clearly generations ahead of anything the Empire possessed, and most disturbing of all, they seemed completely uninterested in conquest or expansion into Imperial territory. That last point worried Emperor Vexthul more than anything else. Species that wanted something could be negotiated with, threatened, or fought. But a species that was perfectly content with what they already had, and who could casually neutralize Imperial military forces while drinking coffee, was an entirely different kind of problem. 3 months after the Jupiter encounter, the first Imperial diplomatic mission arrived at Earth. Ambassador Kylteth, one of the Empire's most experienced negotiators, came prepared to discuss trade agreements, territorial boundaries, and mutual defense treaties. What he found was a small space station in Earth orbit, where he was greeted by a human diplomat who offered him tea and cookies while they discussed the terms of Imperial surrender. "Surrender?" Ambassador Kylteth asked in confusion. "Poor choice of words," the human diplomat admitted. "Let's call it voluntary restructuring of Imperial governance to better reflect the interests of all species involved. Much more diplomatic, don't you think?" Meanwhile, on Earth, the Jupiter encounter was already becoming a minor historical footnote. Students learned about it in school alongside other first contact events. The children who had watched the news coverage that day were more interested in their homework and after-school activities than in the galactic political revolution their parents' generation had accidentally started. Admiral Chen Wei had returned to his regular duties, which included monitoring space traffic, ensuring proper quarantine procedures for visiting ships, and filing the occasional report about unusual activity in the outer system. His official report on the Imperial encounter was filed under Routine Security Operations and took up exactly 2 pages. The conclusion read simply, "First contact protocols successfully implemented. No casualties. Recommend follow-up diplomatic mission to establish formal relations. Just another day's work for humanity's neighborhood watch."